Prithvi Shantirantariksha Shantir Dyaus Shantir Disha Shantiravantara Disha Shantiragni Shantir Vayu Shantiraditya Shantish Chandrama Shantir Nakshatrani Shantirapa Shantiroshadaya Shantir Vanaspataya Shantir Gau Shantiraja Shantirashva Shanti Purusha Shantir Brahma Shantir Brahmana Shanti Shantireva Shanti Shantirme Astu Shantihi. May there be peace on earth and in the sky. May there be peace in the water and in all directions. May there be peace in the plants, in the trees, and in animals. May there be peace in the hearts of all beings. May there be peace in everyone and in everything. Sarvetra sukhinas santu, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschit dukkha bhag bhavet, sarvastaratu durgani, sarvo bhadrani pashyatu, sarvas satbuddhimapnotu, sarvas sarvatra nandatu. May all be happy and healthy. May all see what is good, and may no one experience misery. May all overcome their obstacles and acquire good tendencies. May people everywhere find joy and fulfillment. Let us now spend some time touching the center of peace and joy in our hearts. A good way to begin the practice is to withdraw the scattered energies of the mind and bring them to rest on one point. That point can be our own breathing. Let us therefore practice breathing with awareness. As we breathe in, let us visualize that our body and mind are being filled with love, strength, and compassion. And as we breathe out, let us release all the stress, anxiety, and exhaustion in the body and mind. Let us practice this way for a while. Let us now turn our attention to the region of our heart. Although God is present everywhere and in everyone, the divine presence can be felt most clearly in our own hearts. We can meditate in any way we have been taught. To remain focused, we can take the help of a short mental prayer or a mantra or a divine name. Let us now spend some time dwelling on the presence of God in our hearts. Shanti 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 Harihi Om.
It is well known that Swami Vivekananda passed away on July 4th, 1902. Exactly 4 years earlier, on July 4th, 1898, he was traveling with some American disciples in Kashmir in India. Ready for fun as Swamiji always was, he organized for his disciples a surprise celebration of the American Independence Day. On the previous day, he called a local tailor and had him stitch a replica of the American flag, which was then nailed to the head of the dining room boat, where an early tea was arranged on July 4th. As his own special contribution to the occasion, he wrote a poem that was read aloud by way of greeting. The poem was entitled "To the 4th of July" and can be interpreted as a passionate utterance of his own longing for the final freedom in the infinite. Today, exactly 121 years later, we gather to read the same poem aloud and reflect on Swamiji's words. Behold, the dark clouds melt away that gathered thick at night and hung so like a gloomy pall above the earth. Before thy magic touch, the world awakes. The birds in chorus sing. The flowers raise their starlight crowns, dew set, and wave thee welcome fair. The lakes are opening wide in love, their 100,000 lotus eyes, to welcome thee with all their depth. All hail to thee, thou Lord of light. A welcome new to thee today, O sun, today thou sheddest liberty. Bethink thee how the world did wait and search for thee through time and clime. Some gave up home and love of friends and went in quest of thee, self-banished, through dreary oceans, through primeval forests, each step a struggle for their life or death. Then came the day when work bore fruit, and worship, love, and sacrifice, fulfilled, accepted, and complete. Then thou, propitious, rose to shed the light of freedom on mankind. Move on, O Lord, in thy restless path, till thy high noon overspreads the world, till every land reflects thy light, till men and women with uplifted head behold their shackles broken and know in springing joy their life renewed.
We will sing the Song of the Free on the last page of your book, the last 2 pages. Flames
asatoma satkamaya, tamasoma jyotirgamaya, mrityorma amritam gamaya, aviravir mayeti, rudrayatte dakshinam mukham, tenamam pahi nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. So we gather for our annual Freedom Festival. As you are aware, we normally try to do it on the July 4th. But since the July 4th came in the middle of the week this time, we thought it would be good to do it on a Sunday. So although the history of the day is well known, it's sometimes helpful to revisit it and just go over some of the basic facts. The connection between independence and freedom is obvious, that we cannot be completely free unless and until we are completely independent. So long as I'm dependent on even one thing or one person or one place or one work, any kind of dependence, no matter how subtle, is still not freedom. In fact, in Vedanta, the ideal of freedom is extended to the point that even to be under a benign divine Lord in heaven, wonderful as that state might be, from a strict notion about freedom, that still wouldn't be freedom. If I'm dependent on the mercy of some other being, even if that being is God. And so, if we look at that extreme way of understanding freedom, then that kind of freedom can come only when there is no other being present. The closest we come to that kind of freedom, that kind of independence, at least the taste of that, is in a state of deep sleep. There is nothing there. We are all in complete bliss. We are not dependent on anyone, apparently. But that's the closest we come to. And so there is this connection between, and that's why we call this celebration a Freedom Festival. The reason July 4th is celebrated as the Independence Day clearly is because it was on this day that that really profound document, the Declaration of Independence, was signed. It was passed on July 2nd. Most of them signed it on July 4th. A few signatures were affixed to it later on. But July 4th then became a very, very significant day. It was on this day that the statement was adopted by the Second Continental Congress in Philadelphia in 1776. This Declaration of Independence officially stated that the 13 colonies which were at war with Britain would henceforth regard themselves as independent sovereign states. And this was the first collective step towards forming the United States of America. So it wasn't really a declaration that we are one United States. It was really 13 independent sovereign states separating themselves from being under the British Crown. And so this document, and there is we won't obviously go into all the details of it, but there's a very interesting history about who drafted it and how many people then contributed, how the things were revised, how they had to get representatives from these 13 colonies to adopt it, how there was some resistance, how there were the differences of opinion. It's very fascinating. And eventually, of course, finally, a draft was adopted and it was unanimously signed by all the representatives. Now the sources which were the philosophies or currents of thought that influenced the drafting of this document, and how do you interpret what this document says, there's been much discussion among scholarly community about that. That this document is very profound is also known by the fact that it inspired later on similar documents in many other parts of the world, in Europe, in Russia, in countries of South America and Latin America. So it had a profound influence, not only in shaping the history of this country, but in many other parts of the world as well. Now, the declaration itself, for those of us who have had a chance to see it and read it, it's not really divided into any sections. It's just one long document. But then those who have tried to study it systematically often say it's divided. You can see 5 distinct parts in it. The first is the introduction. And the introduction simply affirms the ability of the people to assume political independence. It acknowledges that there have to be valid reasons why that independence is sought. And also, it's important that these reasons be explained. One must be able to explain what these reasons are. In other words, this is not something that is to be taken lightly. This must be done. This is a very important step, and therefore it must be done with careful thinking. The next section is the preamble, which is the one which is most often quoted today. It outlines a general philosophy that justifies revolution when a government harms the natural rights of its citizens. The third section, which is the longest section, is the indictment. It really provides a long list of the king that is the king of Great Britain, his actions that violated the rights and liberties of Americans. And then the fourth is what often the scholars call a denunciation. So it points out that the existing condition justify the revolution from independence from Great Britain. And finally, there is the conclusion, which asserts that the decision that the people have chosen to change the government, throwing off the political ties with British Crown and becoming independent states, this decision is now affirmed and justified, and the people in the country agree to it. And so this is basically the different ways the document is drafted. The reactions, of course, in those days, this was a pre-internet, pre-everything. So there was a bunch of people sitting in Philadelphia signed it. It took a while. After a day, then they sent it immediately to the printer. It was first published in a local newspaper. Then gradually copies were sent. A copy was sent to George Washington, and he was told to then declare it to the troops, let the armed forces know about it. And then gradually it was translated in different papers in Europe as well. Now, there would obviously, when you have such a document, a public statement made, it's going to have a lot of reactions, and there were various aspects of this declaration were challenged. In England, the British Tories denounced it for not applying the same principles of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness to African Americans. Others asked how the slaveholders in Congress could proclaim that all men are created equal without freeing their own slaves. And that's always something that happens throughout human history. When we uphold certain values, certain principles, then that's the time to pause and ask ourselves, these values which we cherish in our own heart, are we living up to these values ourselves before we... And it's not necessarily that always such should be the case, because it's always good to have a high ideal, a higher principle, but it's also good to be aware of where we are at present. We may not have reached the ideal. That doesn't mean you need to bring that ideal down or dilute our values, but be humble to recognize that this is what we cherish, this is what our goal is, but at present we haven't reached it yet. And so this is what a very natural reaction to such a profound aspirational document for people then, for other people to question, and people who had signed on to it to also self-question what it meant. And therefore, an important effect of this document, although this document was primarily to announce the separation from Great Britain, but an important effect of that was a freeing of slaves, because many of the people who were signatories to it, people within the country, found that if we sign on to this, if we agree with this, then in good conscience, we cannot keep slaves ourselves. And therefore, we see historically, after the signing of this document, an increasing number of slaves were freed by individual slave owners. And within 20 years, in 1804, most of the northern states abolished slavery officially within 20 years. This also shows the power of ideas, power of words. Because using these words in the preamble, a few years later, women's rights advocates declared, because the preamble said all men are equal, and the women advocates said, no, all men and women are equal. And this eventually then led to the women's right to vote. That took a little longer, quite a long time. But this was how this started the chain. So we see the power of ideas, that sometimes in our quest for practicality or pragmatism, sometimes people emphasize action over ideas. Now that's true. Actions are important, but it should not be forgotten that all actions spring, actions are very visible, tangible. That's something everyone can see. But they emerge from these ideas deep down in a very subtle form. And therefore it's important, especially for spiritual seekers as Vedanta students, not only see that what we are doing is right, but also have some clarity about why is it that I'm doing whatever it is that I'm doing. So to have some kind of some stable thought world, or a stable idea about what I'm doing, well, what my goal of my life is. And that kind of self-questioning is very important, because if ideas can shape things in the world outside, they can shape the course and direction my own life is taking. And so it's always very helpful to recognize that value and importance of ideas in our life. So this Declaration of Independence set the ball rolling, and it was profound. But all that it was meant to do was declare that we are no longer a part of the British Empire. We know of some of the things. Well, living in Boston, we know about the Boston Tea Party and the unfair taxation without representation. The people in the colony could not represent. The legislature sitting there could make all these rules, and these people just had to pay taxes. It's oddly enough, what we revolted against about taxation without representation are the problems present even now in some parts of our own country right now. And so we see that, again, that ideal that we fought for, we need to question and say, well, has that ideal been fully realized now that we are free and now that we are independent? But by and large, this document, the Declaration of Independence, was did not receive much attention after that. It had done its job of declaring independence. Even when the US Constitution was written, they did not much bother about the Declaration of Independence. It didn't come up in the discussion. It was Abraham Lincoln, much later, who brought the focus, the attention of the entire nation back to this early document. He viewed it as an expression of the highest principles of the American Revolution. We also know he famously used the first sentence, opening sentence of his Gettysburg Address in 1863. He said, 77 years ago, that is in 1776, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal, men and women now. Abraham Lincoln will need a little bit of editing. I'm sure if he were to give this address today, he would add and women there. And that's again something that great people do. I'm reminded when I was researching this part of the history, the Gita, which is now such a well-known and central part of the Vedanta study, is really 700 verses in the midst of 100,000 verses of the Mahabharata. So it is one huge epic, and there is these 700 verses. It was not, the Gita as we study it today was not a book of independent study at all. It was just a small drop in the ocean of Mahabharata. It was Shankaracharya, the first known person that we have, he was the one who picked up this small little section from that big epic and said, this is a profound book, a profound section. It is probably the best summary of Vedantic wisdom. And when he pointed it out, then all the philosophers and thinkers and students who came after him, everyone took it then upon themselves to read, understand, and interpret this little text. And that's what he did. And I think Lincoln did something similar, was that this little document, which was almost forgotten or almost gone to the background when the entire focus went on the Constitution, but then pointed out and say, no, yes, the Constitution is important, but don't forget the profound ideals given in this declaration. And so I was just thinking, how would a Declaration of Independence drafted by a Vedanta student be? And I think it's going to be a good homework. And we might follow a kind of a similar, at least a similar template. There could be a brief introduction, affirming the ability of every person to seek freedom. And then what a Vedanta student would understand, as I said in the beginning, what would freedom mean to a student of Vedanta? How would we assert the ability of every person to seek freedom and the reason why such freedom is necessary? This was exactly what the founders did in that Declaration of Independence. Because even as a Vedanta student, when we seek freedom from the evil material empire, if you like, why is it that this freedom is necessary? And then this gives us a chance then to see how we are not free. We are bound by the laws imposed not only by the material world outside, but the limitations of the body, the mind, the senses, under whose rigid limitations we live our entire lives. Now, to be fair, not everyone feels that bondage, because many just take it as a given. Well, that's life. Many don't even know that there is a choice, that I can change, or that I should at least make an effort to ask whether should I accept life as I find it, or is it even possible to change this game, so to speak. And so spiritual seekers are often referred to in these texts as courageous people, brave people. Because those who are not adventurous will just say, well, this is what things are. Just do the best you can in a given circumstance. That's almost like giving up. But an adventurous person would say, well, this is how life is, but no, I'm going to find whether I can change it. It might seem insurmountable, impossible, but that's what I'm going to try to do. So that would be an introduction to a Vedanta student's Declaration of Independence. Then in the preamble, one could have the general philosophy of freedom. Or what does freedom mean? And that in that we saw earlier, there is an Upanishad. There is a one place in the Taittiriya Upanishad. It says, Udaram antaram kurute athat tasya bhayam bhavati. What it means is, if I separate myself even a little from anything other than me, I cannot be free from fear. Now, the word fear is to be understood in a very generic sense, not necessarily fear as a big dinosaur or a snake in front of me, but fear in the sense of something that inhibits my ability to be myself, something that inhibits my spontaneity, my freedom. For instance, the example that I like very much is, let's say you are just sitting alone in a room by yourself. There's nobody, and you're just yourself. Now, there's one other person enters that room. That person is no physical threat to you. That person may be even your friend. But just the fact of one other person in the room, you don't feel as free as you felt before when you were alone. Because you know that, well, you are being watched. There's someone reacting to your appearance, your actions, or someone maybe judging you, if not too harshly, even favorably. But the fact of one other being there puts a damper, kind of damps my spontaneity a little bit. And so freedom, therefore, in that sense would mean only when there is nobody else other than me. And that's how then the not to, the non-dual, becomes a goal, not so much because that's a wonderful thing, but it's because unless there is no other being, I cannot be totally free. So real independence is not being, and if there is nobody else to depend on, then really you don't have any choice. You have to be independent. Now, an indictment, there are a long list of indictment in the Declaration of Independence. And here indictment would be a recognition that the existing conditions are defective. Krishna says in the Gita, Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadhi Dukkha Dosha Anudarshanam. How to practice fault finding? Now, we have Holy Mother saying, she said, if you want peace of mind, don't see anybody's faults, see your own faults. And that's very true. The key word there really is anybody's faults. She's speaking about specific faults that we see outside. Mother doesn't say, don't see faults. She doesn't say, period. Anybody's fault. So that doesn't prevent us. I'm just doing a little bit of nitpicking here. So it is okay to see the faults of this existence itself, because that doesn't qualify as anybody's faults. And that's what Krishna is, in fact, encouraging fault finding. The Sanskrit word is dosha anudarshanam. Dosha means defects. Anudarshani means looking at those defects, carefully noticing those defects. And what are those defects? He simply says, Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadhi, that our life being sandwiched between birth and death, between aging and sickness. Now we know these are what we take it as a given, inevitabilities of life. that it begins at one point, and because it begins at one point, it's going to end at some point. Now, beginning and ending may not look so terrible, but what's in the middle is no great either, because every moment we are getting older. That doesn't sound as terrible as saying every day we are going a day closer to our death. That doesn't sound that good either. So looking at it in this way, life doesn't seem like fun when it's kind of a gradual moving towards self-destruction. The mind, again, all of us are dealing with our minds in different ways, and we know that's no great fun either. All the stress, anxieties, worries, tensions, fears, misunderstandings, and so on. Now, the two inseparable companions we have. Sometimes, I think it was Voltaire who said, look at this body, that's what it can do. No freedom. I think it was Voltaire who said, God gave me my relatives, thank God I can choose my friends. And that's true. I mean, at least we have some freedom about whom to be friends with and whom to keep away and whom to be close with. But we really don't have any freedom with regard to our own body and mind. Whether we like it or not, they are going to be with us. And oddly enough, no matter how troublesome they are, we don't want to let them go either. So it's kind of an odd, very paradoxical situation because we don't want to give them up because clearly we don't know what would happen, what is beyond. It's really a mystery. And we don't want to go into the unknown. So better to be with an unsatisfactory known entities than some unknown thing. Even people who truly believe they're going to heaven after death or they're going to be with the Lord are in no hurry to meet the Lord. I mean, think about it. If I truly believe that I'm going to be with the Lord, I should not then worry about, in fact, the earlier I die, the better. The earlier I will be with the Lord. So that shows, I mean, there is this, the to kind of keep the idea of death as far away from me shows that it's still an unknown. There's this faith, there is this hope, but it's still unknown. And so indictment really means recognizing the defects, the existential reality of our existence right now. And then the fourth part of the Vedantic Declaration of Independence would be pointing out that the existing conditions justify the quest for independence. And finally, conclusion would be marking the beginning of serious spiritual quest. And I think this day, from a spiritual standpoint, although the Declaration of Independence is in some ways, although it has theological references, very ethical underpinnings to the statements and the values expressed, it's still a very secular document. But as a Vedanta student declaring their intention for independence, we would then need to ask ourselves that if I consider myself as a serious spiritual seeker, how serious is my own quest for freedom? How serious I am about all of that. And I think that the extent of how serious I am of my own spiritual life would really be helped if we kind of draft our own Declaration of Independence, following what is it that I seek, why I seek it, what are the ways I'm thinking, what is the problem with my present state of being, and why is it that I want to get out of it. And so the Declaration does, in some ways, even for spiritual seekers, can inspire us to look deeply into the idea of freedom, to recognize the value of ideas, of how ideas can shape and reshape history. And if it can do so for the history of nations and civilizations, it can do so equally, perhaps more, of our own personal history and a personal progress. So there is lot to think about. So even as we celebrate, and I'm sure many of you have had a chance to see the fireworks either on television or in real. It was right here outside the Charles, so we could see it from the just window of the center. Um, Well, the fireworks are an expression of joy, and everyone's happy to see them. For a spiritual seeker, those fireworks would be when we make a breakthrough. And many of us, while all of us are oftentimes focused on that ultimate enlightenment and realization, God realization or self-knowledge, it's good to recognize even before we reach that final stage, there are these smaller breakthroughs that continually occur in our spiritual journey. And so the more we try to do it systematically, the more we try to follow the advice and guidance of these great ones that we get from texts, from our own teachers, from the lives of these great saints, we will make these little breakthroughs in our own life. And our own lives can become filled with joy, with fulfillment, with real freedom. So these are some of the thoughts that came to my mind when I was reading about the Declaration of Independence. So those of you who are interested can try drafting your own Declaration of Independence. You don't have to show it to anybody. But it does help. I tried doing it myself, and I found it does help. It sets the wheels kind of moving inside and helps us think clearly about something that most of us know, something that most of us believe in, something that our life has already kind of is going in that direction, but it helps us put our ideas, rearrange the ideas in our mind, and bring some amount of clarity in our own quest. So as spiritual seekers, we don't want to feel at any stage in our life, why have I been, because there are people, believe me, it's real. There are people who have been doing japa meditation for years and then say, I don't know why I'm doing it, I'm just doing it, but why I'm doing it. And I think if we don't want to be, that's not a very happy place to be in. So whatever prayer, worship, meditation that we do, whatever service that we offer at the Vedanta Center or anywhere, all of those things that we do, we must be clear in our head why I'm doing it, how this is connected with my own quest for freedom, with my own quest for independence, with my own quest to be with the divine, whichever way I see that divine. Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhurmuhu. Now we'll have prayer and then Sarvamangala, and then we'll go and have a potluck lunch. Next Sunday, we will celebrate Guru Purnima at 11 o'clock. As usual, we'll have a short worship. There'll be prayer, meditation, worship, music, of course, and then a short reflection, and then another potluck. So 2 consecutive potlucks. So that's our program for the next Sunday. On Wednesday, we will continue with the study of the Upanishad, and Tuesday and Saturday, the meditation will also continue as usual. So let's do the prayer now. May the Divine Being, who is the Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, the Great Spirit of the Native Americans, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May we be granted strength, freedom, and clear understanding. May we learn to see God in our own hearts and in everyone around us. May God bless us all and fill our hearts with gratitude, grace, and love. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.
We will sing Sarva Mangala on page 5.